2 years ago, this was a metal box sitting in an empty field. A shell. The kind of building you would expect to find a tractor parked inside or a few thousand bales of hay stacked to the rafters. Today, families are living in these things. And not just living in them, they are paying builders serious money to stack two of them on top of each other, fill them with staircases and lofts and floor-to-ceiling windows, and call the whole thing home. The two-story barndominium has gone from a rural workaround to one of the most requested builds in the country. Builders in Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and half a dozen other states say they cannot keep up with the calls. However, the reason this is exploding right now is stranger than a simple design trend. It touches the price of dirt, a quiet change in how banks hand out loans, and a whole generation that looked at the traditional American house and decided it was not worth the money anymore. Before we dig in, if you find honest breakdowns of how people are actually building and buying homes worth your time, do me a favor and subscribe. This channel unpacks one real estate shift every single week, and the ones coming up are going to change how you think about where you live. All right, let's talk about how a barn became the most talked about house of the year. First, we need to clear up what a two-story barndominium actually is, because the name throws people off. Barndominium is just a mashup of barn and condominium. The concept is simple. You take a post frame or a steel frame building, the exact same engineering used for barns, workshops, and farm storage, and instead of parking equipment inside, you finish it out as a full house. Kitchen, bedrooms, bathrooms, laundry, everything. The early versions were single-story and wide open because that is how barns are built. One big rectangle with nothing in the way. But somewhere along the line, builders started asking a different question. What if you did not spread out across the land? What if you went up instead? The two-story version takes that same tough metal or post-frame shell and drops a full second floor inside it. Living space and a big open kitchen down below, bedrooms and maybe a loft office up top, and very often a workshop or garage bolted right onto the ground level. From the road, it can look like a sleek modern farmhouse, an industrial loft, or a mountain lodge that wandered off a postcard. Step inside and the ceilings climb 20 feet, the windows swallow entire walls, and it feels nothing like the barn it was born from. To understand why it is everywhere now, you have to go back to where it started. And barndominiums did not come from architects or glossy design magazines. They came from necessity. Out on ranches in Texas and across the rural South, people needed a place to store their gear and a place to sleep, and they did not want to pay for two separate buildings. So they built one big metal shop and framed off a corner to live in. Ranchers called it a shop house or a shouse, and for decades almost nobody outside farm country had ever heard the word. Then two things happened at once. A popular home renovation show ran a segment on a Texas couple living in a converted barn, and the internet caught fire. Suddenly, people who had never touched a bale of hay in their lives were typing barndominium into search bars at 2 in the morning. What had been a practical trick for ranchers turned into a full-blown design obsession. Pinterest boards filled up overnight. Builders who used to only put up hay barns started fielding calls from software engineers and retired school teachers, but here is the thing. Almost every one of those early dream builds was single-story. The two-story boom was still years away, and it took a very specific pile of problems to finally trigger it. For a long time, the single-story barndominium made all the sense in the world. Land in rural America was cheap and there was plenty of it, so spreading out was no problem at all. One level meant no stairs, which appealed to older buyers and anyone thinking hard about aging in place. And a wide-open floor plan photographed beautifully, which kept the whole trend feeding itself online. Builders got very good at these one-story boxes. They could put up a shell in a matter of weeks, hand it off to be finished on the inside, and deliver a house for far less per square foot than a traditional stick-built home. For a while, that was the entire story, and it was a good one. Cheaper, faster, tougher, and it looked incredible on camera. Therefore, the demand kept climbing year after year, spreading out of Texas and into the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain States. But underneath all of that momentum, the ground was quietly shifting. The very thing that made single-story barndominiums possible, cheap and seemingly endless land, was starting to vanish. Here is where the story turns. Over the past few years, the price of buildable land has climbed hard. especially in the exact areas where barndominiums are most popular. The growing edges of towns in Texas, the rolling hills of Tennessee, the lake country up through the Midwest. As cities pushed outward and remote workers went hunting for room to breathe, the cheap acreage that made spreading out so easy got a lot more expensive. And when land gets expensive, the math flips completely. Suddenly, the smartest move is not to sprawl across a big lot. It is to build up on a smaller one. A two-story barndominium can deliver the same square footage on roughly half the footprint. That means a smaller, cheaper piece of land. It means a smaller foundation, which is one of the priciest parts of any build. It means less roofing, because a roof covering a two-story home covers half the ground that a single-story home needs for the same amount of space. So the second floor is not really about looks. It is a direct answer to the single biggest cost problem in housing right now. Every dollar saved on land and foundation and roofing goes straight back into the buyer's pocket, or into nicer finishes on the inside. And once buyers actually ran those numbers, the single-story dream started to look a little dated. And there is a specific reason all of this reached a boiling point in 2026 rather than 5 years ago. The cost of borrowing money to buy an existing home stayed stubbornly high, which pushed a lot of would-be buyers out of the traditional market entirely. When a normal 30-year mortgage on a finished house feels out of reach, people start looking sideways for another door in. Building your own barndominium, often in stages and sometimes partly with your own labor, became that door. On top of that, the price of standard building materials swung wildly over the last few years, and lumber in particular went on a roller coaster that made stick-built homes feel unpredictable and risky to budget. Steel and post-frame construction offered a more stable, more controllable path. You could lock in a firm price on an engineered kit and know exactly what you were signing up for. Put a frustrating resale market, high borrowing costs, and shaky material prices in the same room, and you create the exact conditions where a cheaper, tougher, build-it-yourself home suddenly makes perfect sense. 2026 did not invent the barndominium, it just removed every last reason not to build one. Let's break down the economics properly because this is where the two-story barndominium goes from interesting to almost impossible to argue with. Start with the shell. A post frame or steel building is engineered to enclose enormous amounts of space with very little material and very little labor. There are no load-bearing interior walls fighting you, so the frame goes up fast and the inside is yours to arrange however you please. Now stack that efficiency into two levels. You are enclosing double the living area under a single roof and on top of a single foundation. In construction, the roof and the foundation are two of the heaviest line items on the entire budget. Cut those roughly in half per square foot and the savings pile up in a hurry. Then there is the steel itself. A steel-framed barndominium shrugs off things that keep traditional homeowners up at night. It does not rot. Termites have nothing to chew on. It stands up to high winds and heavy snow loads far better than a lot of conventional framing. In wildfire-prone and storm-prone regions, that toughness is turning into a real conversation with insurance companies. And for many families, it simply means sleeping easier when the weather turns violent. Energy is another piece of the puzzle. These buildings are often wrapped in spray foam insulation from top to bottom, sealing them up tight as a drum. A well-insulated two-story design also holds heat more efficiently because the upstairs and the downstairs share warmth, instead of bleeding it out across one sprawling single level. Add all of it together, and you get a home that can cost noticeably less per square foot to build than a comparable traditional house, while also costing less to heat, cool, and maintain over the long haul. That combination is genuinely rare, and buyers have absolutely noticed. To make those savings real, picture two families building on the very same road. The first family goes traditional and builds a two-story stick-built home. They pour a full foundation, frame it with lumber, and every rising cost in the standard housing market lands squarely on their budget. The second family builds a two-story barndominium with the exact same square footage. Their engineered shell goes up in a fraction of the time. Their crew spends far fewer labor hours on the frame. Their foundation and their roof are sized for a compact two-story footprint instead of a sprawling single level. By the time both homes are finished, the barndominium family has often spent meaningfully less to get the same amount of living space, and they are left with a building that costs less to insure and heat on top of it. Now multiply that gap across thousands of families making the same decision at the same time. And you start to understand why builders in these states cannot answer the phone fast enough. People are often shocked by how the build actually comes together because it looks nothing like a normal construction site. With a traditional home, you watch a slow, messy process of framing walls stick by stick over long months. With a post frame or steel barndominium, the shell can be standing in a matter of days once the parts arrive on the lot. Suddenly, there is a complete, weather-tight building sitting there, and the neighbors just assume it is a big new shop. Then the real work begins on the inside, where the plumbing, wiring, insulation, and finishes turn that empty shell into an actual home. This two-stage rhythm is a huge part of the appeal. Some families dry the building in quickly, then finish the interior at their own pace as money allows, moving in once the essential rooms are done and completing the rest over the following year. Try doing that with a conventional build, and you are stuck living inside a construction zone for the duration. The barndominium lets people spread the cost and the effort out in a way the traditional path never really allowed, but money is only half of why this is happening in 2026. The other half is about how people actually want to live now. Remote work did not go away when the offices reopened. Millions of people still need a real workspace at home, and a two-story barndominium hands them one without surrendering the main floor. Put the bedrooms and a quiet office upstairs, keep the big open kitchen and living area downstairs, and you get a kind of separation that a single-level open plan simply cannot offer. Then there is the multi-generational angle. More families are choosing to live together again, whether it is aging parents moving in or adult kids who cannot crack the housing market on their own. A two-story layout lets you carve out private space for everyone, sometimes with a full second suite, all under one efficient roof. And we cannot forget those house roots. Plenty of these builds still keep a massive garage or workshop on the ground floor. For a woodworker, a mechanic, a welder, a small business owner, or anyone with a hobby that needs serious room, having the shop and the home fused into one building is the entire dream. You climb the stairs and you are home. You walk back down the stairs and you are at work. For a lot of people in 2026, that blend of home, office, and workshop in a single durable building is exactly the life they have been trying to stitch together for years. So, who is actually building these things in 2026? Because the buyer has changed almost as much as the house has. In the early days, it was ranchers and country folks who wanted something practical. Today, walk through the customer list of any busy barndominium builder, and you will find a wildly different crowd. You will find young couples in their late 20s and early 30s who did the brutal math on a starter home in the suburbs, saw the price, and decided they would rather build twice the space for less on a few acres just outside town. You will find remote software workers and designers who realized their paycheck no longer depended on living near a downtown, so they cashed out of the city and bought land. You will find retirees who sold a paid-off house near the top of the market and wanted a lower maintenance, energy-efficient home to settle into for the next 30 years. And you will find small business owners and tradespeople who needed the workshop just as badly as they needed the bedrooms. What ties all of these very different people together is a single idea. They stopped believing that the standard subdivision house was the only way or even the best way to own a home. Once that belief cracks, the two-story barndominium stops looking like a novelty and starts looking like an obvious choice. There is one more force driving this, and it is almost entirely emotional. Somewhere along the way, the barndominium look itself became something people genuinely want. The soaring great room with a wall of black-framed glass, the exposed steel and timber, the wraparound porch, the open loft peering down over the living space below. These images spread across social feeds by the millions, and for a lot of younger buyers, they quietly became the picture of what a dream home should feel like. It is aspirational in a way a beige subdivision house simply is not. So the trend now feeds on two engines at once: the cold, hard math that makes it affordable, and the warm, aspirational image that makes people fall in love with it. When a home manages to hit both the wallet and the heart at the same time, it does not stay a niche for very long. There is also a stubborn myth worth clearing up because it keeps scaring good people off. A lot of folks still picture a barndominium as a cold, echoing metal warehouse with a couch shoved into the corner. That version is long gone. Walk into a finished two-story build today and you would never once guess there was steel behind the walls. You will find hardwood floors, quartz countertops, exposed wooden beams, board and batten accents, dramatic staircases, and those enormous black-framed windows that have become the signature of the whole style. The metal shell is just the bones. What people are doing inside these homes now rivals custom builds that cost twice as much. That gap between what buyers imagine and what these homes have actually become is a big part of why the trend keeps catching brand new people every single month. One thing that keeps hooking people is the sheer freedom of the floor plan. Because a post frame or steel shell carries its weight on the outer frame, the entire interior is basically a blank canvas. There are almost no interior walls that have to stay put, which means you can drop the staircase wherever it makes sense, open the great room as wide as you want, and shuffle rooms around on paper until the layout fits your life exactly. Families designing a two-story barndominium routinely put the primary suite downstairs and the kids upstairs, or flip it the other way, or wrap a loft around three sides of the great room simply because they can. Try asking for that kind of flexibility in a conventional tract home, and you run into a load-bearing wall and a much bigger bill. That freedom to shape the space however you like is a quiet reason. So many buyers, once they start sketching, never go back to looking at ordinary houses again. Now, if all of this is starting to sound too good to be true, here is where we slow down. Because the two-story barndominium comes bundled with a set of very real headaches that the glossy photos never show you. Start with financing. A lot of traditional lenders still do not know how to categorize these homes. Some banks hesitate to write a mortgage on a steel building because it does not fit neatly into their usual boxes. Buyers frequently have to hunt for specialty lenders or agricultural loans, and that can mean bigger down payments and a lot more paperwork. Then there is the appraisal problem. Home values are usually set by comparing a property to similar homes that sold nearby. But if you build a two-story barndominium in an area that has never seen one, there may be nothing to compare it against. That can drag the appraisal down and complicate both the loan and the eventual resale. And speaking of resale, that is its own quiet gamble. Barndominiums appeal to a specific kind of buyer. If you ever need to sell and the local market just does not get the concept, you could be waiting a very long time for the right person to walk through the front door. Zoning is another wall that people slam into. Some counties and homeowner associations have rules that quietly block metal buildings as primary residences, and buyers do not always discover this until they are already deep into the process and thousands of dollars committed. And finally, there is the builder problem. As demand has exploded, the number of contractors who truly know how to finish a two-story post-frame home well has not kept pace. There are plenty of horror stories out there of buyers who hired the wrong crew and ended up with condensation dripping down the walls, insulation that never worked right, or a second floor that was never properly engineered to carry the load in the first place. The dream is real, but so are the ways it can quietly fall apart. For years, the loudest knock against barndominiums was that they would never hold their value the way a normal house does. That story is starting to change too. As more of these homes sell across more markets, buyers and appraisers finally have real comparisons to work with, and well-built two-story barndominiums in desirable areas are holding their value better than the skeptics ever predicted. The durability helps here. A steel-framed home that resists rot, pests, and weather is a home that ages slowly, and a home that ages slowly protects the money you poured into it. None of this makes a barndominium a guaranteed investment, and location still rules everything the way it always has. But the old assumption that these were disposable metal sheds with a kitchen inside is quietly dying, replaced by the recognition that a thoughtfully built one is simply a house, and a tough one at that. The geography of this boom tells its own story. It caught fire first in Texas, where the ranching routes ran the deepest and the land was wide open, and from there it rippled outward along fairly predictable lines. It moved into Oklahoma and across the southeast, into Tennessee, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida, wherever land was still reachable and the weather rewarded a tough, storm-ready build. It climbed up into the Midwest through the farm states where post-frame construction was already a familiar way of life. And it reached into the Mountain West where that lodge-like look felt right at home against the hills. Each region put its own spin on it. In the South, it leans farmhouse. In the mountains, it leans rustic lodge. In some suburbs pressing right up against the trend, it leans sleek and almost industrial. But everywhere it lands, the underlying logic is identical. Take a durable shell, build it up instead of out, and get more home for your money on less land. It is worth asking why the Barndominium won this particular moment, and not one of the other alternatives everyone was hyping just a few years back. Tiny homes had their wave, but for most families, the reality of squeezing an entire life into a few hundred square feet wore off fast. Shipping container homes looked incredible in photos, but they came with insulation nightmares and cramped, awkward interiors that fought against how people actually live. Prefab and modular homes solved for speed, yet they often carried premium prices and rigid designs that left little room to make them your own. The two-story barndominium quietly beat all of them on the one metric that matters most to a real family. It gave you a genuinely large, comfortable, customizable home, built tough, on a reasonable budget, using land efficiently. It never asked you to shrink your life or accept a design that somebody else picked for you. In a crowded competition of housing alternatives, the barn kept winning because it compromised the least on the things people flatly refused to give up: space, durability, and control. So where does all of this go from here? Everything pushing the two-story barndominium forward in 2026 is getting stronger, not weaker. Land is not getting cheaper. Traditional homes are not getting more affordable. Remote work and multi-generational living are not fading into the background. Therefore, the pressures that made building up on a small lot so appealing are only intensifying with each passing month. At the same time, the entire industry around these homes is maturing fast. More lenders are rolling out products built specifically for barndominiums. More appraisers are seeing enough of them to value them fairly instead of guessing. More builders are specializing, which means better quality and far fewer disasters. Kit companies now sell entire two-story barndominium packages, engineered and delivered ready to assemble, which drives the price down even further and takes a lot of the gamble out of the build. What started as a clever way for ranchers to avoid paying for two separate buildings has grown into a genuine answer to a housing affordability crisis that shows no real sign of ending. It is durable, it is efficient, it uses expensive land intelligently, and it fits the way people actually live right now. That is a rare thing to find in a market where almost nothing feels affordable anymore. And maybe that is the real reason it is suddenly everywhere. It is not really about the metal or the height or the trendy black windows framing the sunset. It is about a wave of buyers who sat down, ran the numbers, looked hard at the traditional path to owning a home, and decided to build something smarter on their own terms instead. The barn was never really the point. The freedom was. So now you know why the two-story barndominium went from a rancher's shortcut to the most talked about home in the country. The land math, the financing shift, the changing way we live, and the raw durability that keeps pulling new buyers in. If this reshaped how you think about what a home can even be, you are going to want to see the next one. Because next week we are breaking down the hidden costs that almost nobody warns you about before you build one of these. That video is going to save someone a serious amount of money. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and I will see you in the next one.